You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hello, and thanks for joining Revolution 250, where we look at events that took place 250 years ago this week. This is from the American Revolution Podcast, a short bonus episode to remind you about these important anniversaries from the Revolutionary War. This week, we remember the arrival of General Charles Lee in New York City on February 4th, 1776. Charles Lee was third in command of the Continental Army, behind only George Washington and Artemas Ward. Lee and Washington had known each other since the Braddock Campaign of 1755. Back then, Lee was a lieutenant in the British Army and had command authority over Washington as a militia officer. Lee went on to serve in various battles of the French and Indian War, then later participating in the British invasion of Portugal in 1762. He rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel in the British Army and had even served as a major general while assisting the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth during a period while Britain was not at war. Later, Lee moved to Virginia and bought a plantation. When the Revolution began, he supported the Patriot cause and offered his services to the new Continental Army. At the time, Lee's war record was far superior to Washington's. Congress, however, was not comfortable handing over command of the Continental Army to a British regular who had just resigned his commission. So Washington got the lead role. Artemas Ward, who had been commander of the New England Army of Observation, took second in command, and General Lee was third in command. Lee accepted this major general's commission that was below Washington. Lee was generally respectful toward Washington as his commander, but anyone who talked to Lee for more than a few minutes realized that he considered himself superior to Washington as an officer and as a military strategist. He seemed to be biding his time until everyone realized the same thing and replaced Washington with Lee as commander of the Continental Army. Lee got bored with the siege of Boston and continually pestered Congress for an independent command. Washington, believing that the siege of Boston would be over soon and that the British would target New York City next, proposed to give General Lee an independent command that would have him set up defenses in that city. Washington didn't have any regiments to spare from his siege of Boston, so Lee spent a few weeks in Connecticut, where he raised an army of about 1,200 soldiers to lead to New York. The Patriot militia in New York City had already forced the royal government and the few regulars who were stationed there onto Navy ships in New York Harbor. But it was clear that the British would soon be there in force, so Lee's mission was to set up the defenses against a British invasion. The British fleet was already in the harbor and would only grow over time. One reason for deploying Lee when they did was that the Americans learned that the British General Henry Clinton had left Boston and sailed to New York. This led to fears that General Clinton might lead an imminent attack on New York. General Lee figured there was nothing like the direct approach, so he wrote Clinton a letter and had it delivered to Clinton's ship in New York Harbor. Lee and Clinton had been old friends in the regular army, where they served together for years. The fact that Lee was now a traitor and one of the commanding generals in an army that Clinton was tasked to destroy didn't seem to bother either of them in their correspondence. Clinton assured Lee that he was only there to confer with the royal governor, that he only had a few companies with him, and that he had no intention of landing in New York. He told Lee that he was on his way down to the Carolinas to meet up with General Cornwallis and the regiments he was bringing over to retake the Carolinas. All of this was true, but really, Clinton? Just write a letter outlining your entire plan and send it to the enemy? Even Lee seemed skeptical when he forwarded the information to General Washington. What kind of general would do that? But that's exactly what Clinton did. Lee immediately set about testing the resolve of the British Navy. He brought his 1,200 Connecticut soldiers into the city, along with another 1,000 from New Jersey. He dismantled the artillery battery at the harbor right under the nose of the British Navy. Now, the British had threatened to level the city if the Patriots took those guns, but Lee took them and the British did nothing. Lee also cut off Governor Tryon's ability to send and receive letters from his ship in the harbor. While Lee was an aggressive military figure, he definitely lacked Washington's political skills. Lee never asked for anything. He ordered it. Like other British officers I've discussed in the past, Lee considered civilian government officials as his subordinates, there to follow his orders. The New York Provincial Congress was in no mood to take orders from this outsider. Lee and the Congress started an intense feud that got really personal really fast. It probably would have become a problem had not Congress decided to transfer Lee out of the city. In February, only weeks after Lee's arrival in New York, Congress ordered him to take command of the Northern Army in Canada. Then, a few weeks later, Congress changed its mind based on complaints from the current leadership of the Northern Army as well as Northern delegates in Congress. So Congress gave Lee a new command, the Southern Department. Lee would be responsible for the defense of Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia. Now, since Lee knew Clinton was headed to that region with a fairly sizable army, he was happy to have an independent command that would give him a chance to show off his military prowess. By the end of March, Lee was on his way south, taking up a new headquarters in Williamsburg, Virginia. I hope you've enjoyed this Revolution 250 moment. Please subscribe for free on whatever podcast platform you like. And thanks again for listening to this Revolution 250 moment on the American Revolution podcast.